Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to tonight's episode of Talking Point. I'm your host, Syed Neaz Ahmad. In our studios today, we have a young lady, Sophia Karim, an architect and an artist. She's a freelance architect, but until recently, she was involved with two practices in two of the iconic cities of the world, London and New York. Welcome to the show, Sophia.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm very well. I'm
on this
pleased to
very
be
bright
here.
Black Friday.
Yes, unusual day.
Unusual day. You continue your professional practice with visual arts, activism, and writing. How do you do that?
Well, my career path has been very, very long. In fact, as you said, I'm an architect, but how did I enter that profession?
Yep.
Originally, as a child, I wanted to be an artist. Art was my obsession. But art never seemed a viable career option for us. My parents had come from Bangladesh and sacrificed a lot for our education and our futures. And they're doctors, and they wanted
Both
us.
of them, yes.
Both of them are doctors, yeah.
Your
So-
mom taught at Imperial College, isn't it?
Yes, she taught at, she was a consultant at St Mary's Hospital, and she taught at Imperial College. So the expectation on us was that we would also be doctors.
Doctors, yes.
So I don't know where this art thing came from, because there were no art books in our house. There was not that much art there, but that was what I wanted to do. I tried to suppress it, this urge, but it would keep coming up and coming up.
Why did you try to suppress it?
Because it was clear that they wanted us to be doctors. When I mentioned art as a career, they said, no, that's not a career. But this creative force that you have doesn't go away, and it continued. So it would come out in various ways. For instance, my father had a lot of anatomy books and medical books, so I used to do a lot of medical illustration from those books. And then one day they bought 3 very cheap books from the pound shop. One was on Rembrandt, one was on Leonardo da Vinci, and one was on Michelangelo.
Oh, my goodness.
And I was fascinated by these books, and we had these curtains in our house, these long red velvet curtains, and my favorite thing to do would be to hide behind those curtains and look at these books. And I noticed that Leonardo da Vinci had also done this fusion of art and science and had done medical drawings. By the time I reached 17 and I had to decide what I wanted to do with my career, there was a big turning point. A sort of seminal experience happened. We went to Bangladesh for our summer holiday. We went to Dhaka, and there I saw 2 buildings that made me decide that I wanted to be an architect.
Which were those buildings?
One was Louis Khan's Shangshad Bhavan Parliament building.
Yes. Quite an old building, though. Yes.
Yes,
It
incredibly
looks more like a
powerful.
nuclear reactor.
Do you think so? Okay, so I didn't think that at all.
Very solid, yes.
Very solid, monumental, plays with forms, negative spaces.
Yes. I saw it being built, you see. I was in Dhaka those days, you see.
Yeah, and what did you think?
Early 60s.
What did you think?
Well, we couldn't make out of I mean, is it a building, is it a factory, is it a warehouse, is it silos for grains or whatever. But it never seemed, but I've been inside many times, and it is very practical. It needs a bit of, in present state, it needs a bit of maintenance, but it's a fantastic building.
Interesting.
Very, very functional.
Okay, so I saw that building, and the other thing I saw was we went to my Abba's village, his gram, which is Arai Hajar. Jhaugora is his actual gram. And it was the mud.
Is that somewhere in Narayanganj?
It's not far from Dhaka, maybe
that's
1.5 hours.
Yes. Around along River Meghna, or
I'm not sure.
Yep.
I'm not sure.
Chitalaka.
I was a child, so I think I was holding on to these experiences, and I went into the mud houses in his village, and both there and in Louis Khan's Parliament building, I had the most visceral emotional response to the architecture. There was something raw, and it was pure emotion. And at that stage I decided I want to be an architect and I want to create spaces like that.
Yep.
So I then
just
yes.
a bit of a very stupid question, and I do ask stupid questions. What does an architect do? I mean, builders make buildings, you see, and it is said that architects make homes, see, for people, see, not just buildings, but who is going to live there? What does he do? Or what does the family do? What do they eat? What are their hobbies? How long do they live? And how many people live? And what would they like to do with this space? Is that so? An architect?
So you're asking what does an architect think about when they're making a building?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I can tell you what I think about when I make a building. The study, unfortunately, the practice of architecture is a sanitized and neutered form of what I think architecture is. It's pretty much reduced to creating, for instance, in my practice, it was mainly creating faceless emblems of corporate power, buildings that make money.
Yeah.
The spiritual pursuit or philosophical inquiry or poetry is almost gone. It's not there at all. But for me, that's what interests me in architecture.
Right. See.
A connection with the human condition and the human experience. I'm going to tell you a little story about another turning point that's happened in my career and my relationship to architecture. So as I said, that for 20 years I practiced this straight up form of quite commercial, conventional architecture. There was always something I found niggling and very problematic in many areas of commercial architecture and the way architecture is practiced. My first experience was in 1997. I was working at Norman Foster's studio. And
in
it was
London?
Yes, in London. But the building was in Saudi Arabia, it was in Riyadh. And it was a tall building, cultural foundation. And at the top it had a very impressive globe, a glass globe, a geodesic dome. So I think I was 21 years old, and that was a really great opportunity for me as a young architect to be working on something so iconic. Whilst working on it, some photos came back from site, and I noticed that it's about 260 meters tall. Up at the top, dangling from ropes, were Bangladeshi migrant workers that were putting the cladding on. Something that would be criminal in this country in terms of health and safety. And I realized that my people are being used to make buildings that I design in that way. And this kind of aspect of architecture continued to be problematic for me throughout my career. And I just observed. I observed and kind of stored away things that I found problematic. Last year...
You were concerned only about their health and safety?
I was concerned about...
Not because they were Bangladeshis?
I was concerned about health and safety, but mainly I was concerned about the way that in order to create our visions, people are exploited, that we don't speak out about that, that architecture is part of a system of power and an apparatus which exploits people to create grand visions that serve power. So,
but isn't the architect who has created the whole thing, you see, from a thought to something concrete, you see, he is creating it, but the other people, of course, they get involved, and the builders are there, the masons are there, engineers are there, and they build it up, see. So the thought and the ideas come from the architect, right?
yeah. The thought and the ideas come from the architect, but it's not as free as you think. So the moment, if you're working, my career in architecture has been defined by the neoliberalist era of aggressive capitalism. I'm sorry to say that most of the urban fabric that we see around us is that. And the moment that you put pen to paper, you will be required to maximize a developer's profit. So a lot of the shapes of buildings that you see around us, it's not just our visions. Those are based on algorithms for delivering maximum profit to a developer. So you're part of this game all the way through of serving certain demands of an industry of buildings, which are essentially financial speculation. And if a building is part of a system of financial speculation, part of that system means exploiting workers, because in order to make maximum profit, some people will have to be exploited. And that's what I was witnessing.
So that was Riyadh.
That was Riyadh.
Yep. Yeah, but there's been a lot of developments in the Middle East, and they have iconic buildings in Dubai and Riyadh, and wonderful Bangladeshi architects, Mr. F.R. Khan. I think he was designed the Hajj terminal in Jeddah. He also designed the university I used to work at, Al Qura University in Mecca. He designed that, see. But those were very practical ones, and I used to get, very spiritual connection with those buildings, you see. They were not like built for the particular purpose of making money, but serving the purpose.
Yeah. So I think the spiritual connection is really, really important, and it's not something that's encouraged. So in commercial practice, notions of spiritualism, poetry, philosophy are not really encouraged. A turning point for me happened when last year, when my uncle Shahidul Alam, the photographer, was jailed. I stopped working and began campaigning for his release, but something interesting happened. I began processing everything through architecture. So I began to construct the spaces that I imagined he was occupying in my mind. And I think the reason I was doing that was various things, but one of the reasons was I hoped that by constructing them in my mind that I could enter those spaces and be with him. I couldn't stand the thought of him being alone. Initially, those spaces that I constructed... I
saw some of those drawings.
Did you?
Are you talking about that?
I am, yeah. So initially they were very raw spaces, and then as I began to know more and more about his conditions, I filled in those spaces in my mind with detail. After he was released, I had a number of conversations with him about those spaces, and I built them as architectural models, and they were a combination of his memories and my imagination, and that was interesting as well, because normally we build from dimensions and other things, but to build something from memory. And I think this was a shifting point in my approach to architecture, and at that point I began to write my theories, which I'm currently working on and will probably be my lifetime's work, on an architecture of disappearance, where I am challenging...
Okay, on this very interesting point of architecture of disappearance, we take a break.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll pick up the thread, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us, and we'll be back after this very, very short break. Don't go away. See you soon.